Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films that goes beyond basic film criticism to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari, and with me today is...
Adam Perry.
Welcome back!
It's so good to be back.
It's so awesome, and I get to do this a few more times, so it's just so fun. What movie are we overanalyzing today?
Elvis.
All right, Elvis is Baz Luhrmann's biopic of Elvis Presley, played by Austin Butler, from his childhood to becoming a rock and movie star in the 1950s while maintaining a complex relationship with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks. So, the burning question.
All right.
On your mind.
How many times did you use the bathroom during this movie?
Once.
All right. That's not bad.
But I was seriously about to Francis Bacon off this earth? Holding it. I was exploding.
Oh,
I checked my watch and I was I'm not going to make it.
The person who died doing that at a dinner? I think it was a bunch of people.
Yeah. It was the French king or something. Yeah. Anyway, how many times did you pee?
None. I went to the bathroom 0 times.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
And I would also like to say the movie, it's 2.5 hours without credits, I think. I felt like there was 9 minutes at least of that runtime devoted to credits, which to me is not that long of a movie. It's not short, it's not too long. And I made it.
For me, it was a half an hour of previews before the movie even started, and I was this movie is 3 hours. I only needed 3 trailers. That would have been sufficient.
Or honestly, none would be good these days.
I definitely
maybe 2.
I like seeing them because that's when I see them. I'm not one who looks them up on YouTube.
That's true, I guess.
But overall, what did you think?
I had a really great time.
Okay.
I think that my wife and I saw this together. We spent the whole walk home talking about how you kind of can't... you kind of know what you're getting with Baz at this point, So if the style doesn't appeal to you, right off the bat, I feel like you're at a disadvantage. I found it well-paced. I thought the music was great. I thought the performances were really good. We'll get into Tom Hanks, I'm sure. I really thought that Austin Butler was great in terms of, you could not take your eyes off of him. And he, for me, was perfect as kind of the blank sort of slate the movie needed the character to be while injecting... a little bit of humanity. I mean, I felt like everyone in it was kind of a cartoon anyway, but there were moments where personality kind of shone through. I thought he was great. I thought all the Australians that were literally every other character were great. And I was really entertained. I don't know how good I would say it was. I think it's the most fun I've had at the movies with a biopic for a really long time. And it also kind of surprised me that people don't really know this story. And so I think that part of it is really cool too. Yeah, so it was a really mixed bag for me. And so we'll get into the performances, the technical aspects. I realized I more or less love Strictly Ballroom. Strictly Ballroom is among my top 10 favorite movies of all time. I don't think I like Baz Luhrmann's other films. Sure. Because none of them are comedies, I think, as part of it. Strictly Ballroom is really funny, and that's kind of what makes it a good movie. There's humor in them for sure, but they're all very theatrical. So, that aside, I think to sort of set up how I feel about the movie, I needed it basically to do one thing for me, and I was willing to call it a success, and it achieved that, so I'm willing to call it a success. Oh, I did not see that coming.
Which was, it needed to explain Elvis, right? We're not of the Elvis generation. No. We all definitely know who Elvis is. We're of the, after, Elvis is still alive tabloid generation.
Yeah, and, but I feel even for us, it was, such a, almost bigger than life sort of thing. It was this sort of monolith you were aware of. Right, but despite all of... So I knew who Elvis was. I've definitely heard most of the hits, all of that stuff. But I was I needed the movie to explain to me how he became
such a sensation, right?
Yeah.
Like how Elvis became the myth of Elvis. And I think the movie did that, right? Like I think they put him in context where you were like, oh, I get why what he was doing was so new and so different, and like audiences were sort of primed for it and all that stuff. But I will honestly say a huge part of that is a credit to Austin Butler.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Without the right actor in this part, this movie would have been, dare I say, as much a failure as Bohemian Rhapsody, which was so miscast to my mind, like just horribly miscast.
Yeah, that's among the, like, that is constantly on my worst, like, films I've ever seen list. Bohemian Rhapsody. I think it is just so bad.
And again, so like having Austin Butler play Elvis, it was like, that's a really high bar. It's like having actresses play Marilyn Monroe, which they've pretty much all failed at.
Yeah, his singing was great that he did, and sort of his impressions of the performances were so good.
They were so good. A lot of it was Elvis's actual voice, which was the right thing to do, because part of what made Elvis so famous. Yeah, no, a lot of it was Elvis himself, especially in the later stuff, which like, he's a beautiful...
Well, it worked, you know?
Yeah, he's a beautiful voice.
I did not notice that.
You should use Elvis's voice. Yeah. That's part of what made Elvis Elvis. But I was like, darn it, Austin was hot. And like, that's all I needed him to be. Like, he had to bring the sex appeal or else... Yeah,
and they didn't try to make him like an Elvis clone, I feel like, in terms of his facial appearance. He kind of like embodied the sort of spirit of Elvis, and that I think was better than having someone who like looked just like him. Agreed.
But the blend at the end
was so good.
Was like near seamless. And there was a minute there when I was like, I think that's the real Elvis.
Yeah.
And I couldn't for a minute I was like kind of stumped. So that was really cool. But yeah, so I loved Austin Butler. I hope he gets an Academy Award for this performance, because I don't think it's easy to play somebody who is, you know, a legend like that and pull it off. And he totally did for me.
Oh, for sure.
And it never seemed like a caricature. I don't know. So all praise in the world.
Yeah. And I think he almost let sort of the Baz Luhrmann insanity as like, he was like the eye of the storm almost, because he didn't give such a theatrical performance that actors tend to give in those movies in ways that I like. Like, I love Great Gatsby. I love Australia is another one that I really like. They're not...
Oh, I liked Australia. Actually, I saw that not too long ago. I thought that was Baz Luhrmann.
He's kind of one who, to me, he kind of fits in with like a Wes Anderson type almost, where he has a very distinct style and that can rub people the wrong way. And I'm always trying to think about like how he finds success in making like excessive big movies that they don't really like seem to make anymore. And I think it's because he doesn't make many movies. He's only made 6 movies.
Right.
And I think that like it's been 10 years, I think, since his last movie. And that kind of like, I feel like there was some sort of like pent up demand for a movie like this where it's like that level of crazy. But the other ones have not had sort of like that center. The character is the name of the movie. And like, I thought it was kind of cool how, even though the hook was that it was about someone else, that they did a good job keeping him at the center of the movie and kind of being like this sort of stabilizing force for the insanity that was that movie.
Yeah. So let's get into a little bit of the insanity. So you have 2 choices here. We're going to have to hit both. Do we want to start with Tom Hanks, or do we want to start with all the technical stuff? Where do you want to go?
Well, let's make him wait for Tom Hanks.
All right.
I think that's the sort of like, in the childish way to put it, the funnest thing to talk about in this movie, I think, is Tom Hanks. And, we could save that.
Yeah, so unlike a lot of people, I read a lot of reviews, I took a look at some of the audience scores, and the movie's doing quite well, actually, for every movie doing really terrible in the theaters right now. It's doing pretty well, but...
for like an adult-oriented, I guess.
Yeah, non-superhero movie.
Yeah.
I liked the movie better as it went on.
For sure. It took a little while to take... At the beginning, he does this stuff with like split screens and all this sort of... It took a while to find its footing. At first, I thought it was just kind of like it was almost like it couldn't keep its attention on any one thing. It was so much going on.
I literally was like, as I was watching the whole first whatever hour of the movie, I was like, every take was like a fraction of a second too short. Like, I kept feeling like it was so jarring moving from cut to cut. And I was like, I needed like a tiny bit longer to linger on this moment. And it cut away. And it was consistently, it just kept cutting away just like a little bit too soon for my brain. I was like, I needed a half a beat longer or whatever it was. And that was getting on my nerves because I was like, I can't absorb anything. Everything's like flashing by too quickly for me to understand like what's happening. Yeah.
And I think that was like effective for sort of priming the audience for the story, but it was kind of frustrating to watch because it settled into sort of more like a 3-act structure after that, or like not even 3 per se, but like just sections of movie that made more sense. And you just kind of had to go through, I want to say maybe 15 or so minutes where there's the current, like, first of all, they do the Elvis fainting and going on stage, and then the Colonel has his deal, and that kind of like symbolism or symbiotic thing they're trying to set up there. And then there's this like the Colonel spouting like way too many things about Elvis right away. And then it just chills out and starts at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that technique comes back a couple times later in the movie where I'm like, nope, hold just a little bit longer. But yeah, it was particularly noticeable. It's like, we're just trying to get the background stuff out of the way. And I was like, slow down.
Yeah, it was almost like how he was like moving from era to era was by doing that each time. Like particularly like where he is, I guess, kind of coming into his own in the Vegas scene. And it's almost lifted exactly from the trailer where he's doing the same pose at the end of a song and the outfit keeps changing.
Right.
And I like that image a lot, but I think that it was these transitions, particularly in the beginning, went on for just a little too long. It could have been maybe like 2 minutes of that to kind of like fast forward to the next part of Elvis's life that they were going to focus on instead of doing gimmicky things like split screens, which I cannot stand in movies at all ever. I think it's the worst.
At all ever.
No, I'm not here for that. I think as far as the other stuff that they were doing for advancing the story did work. It felt refreshingly like a early aughts sort of structure of a biopic. Mm-hmm. Rather than, we're going to focus on the 2 days leading up to this one show that, like, everything has to be now. It's like, you know, everything old is new again. And when they sort of, like, layer in the framing device or whatever of the narration, it made it seem not that stale, you know? Like, not just a rise and fall biopic.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there are advantages and disadvantages of doing it either way. I haven't necessarily... Yeah, so I'm with you. I'm like, you just got to make it work. And I didn't have a problem with him doing, like, the long stretch. And I will say, like, so to me, I'm like, the things about Baz Luhrmann, you know, the frenetic pacing, the editing, all of that, very signature Baz Luhrmann, cinematography, the color red. He loves a primary color, but he loves red more than all the other colors. Yeah, sure. It's like the signature red was everywhere, and in an Elvis biopic, that worked for me. So I'm like, I do like a lot of his stylistic choices. I just never thought any of it has worked as well as it did in Strictly Ballroom.
Yeah.
So, you're a bigger fan. How did you feel this sort of stacked up in his oeuvre?
I like this one a lot. The earlier two, I haven't seen as many times. So Romeo plus Juliet, which I think is great. And Moulin Rouge. I'm not as high on those because I just haven't seen them as often. I liked both of them. I thought they were fine. But as far as it's stacking up against the other stuff, I'd say it's just as entertaining as all of them. He just, you know, it's kind of its own genre for me at this point. I don't like putting movies in in categories where it's like, well, this is good for this. You know, I try to like keep everything on a level playing field, but I do kind of almost have to take his stuff like apart because of what it's just so theatrical and so over the top that it is, and it's sort of gets its own qualifier almost against other movies. But it's fun and
that's interesting. I guess to me, I'm like, that's part of what, like or don't like his style, for sure. But I'm like, that's part of, like, what makes a great director. Like, it should be a signature look. Like, you should have a voice that is your voice, right?
Yeah, I guess it's like, I don't even want to, like, I'm tiptoeing around, like, saying, like, not taking them as seriously. This one is easier to take seriously. Things like The Great Gatsby are just so... almost, it's hard to, like, even, I can't believe I'm saying that this is the one that tiptoes up to indulgence, because he pulls it off in a way that none of this seems indulgent, if that makes any sense. It's all very authentic. I think he wants to make these sort of big, crazy pictures. Yeah, it's not that I don't want to take it seriously, because it is serious, and you can tell that a lot of sort of research and love of the material goes into his movies, but there's just something about them that kind of makes them stand apart to me, and I think Elvis was almost making more of an attempt to kind of be taken a little bit more seriously, and I thought was successful at that.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, and this is like the whole reason that I like boycott the Oscars and all of that. It's like there's all these like hidden biases and judgments about who gets to be taken seriously and who doesn't. And like I now that you sort of elaborated, I mean, that's kind of my point. Why do we... Baz Luhrmann has this signature style that a lot of audiences love.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And who is anybody to say it's not quality or it's not art? You know, it's like, that's BS to me. Like,
yeah, if the thing is cheesy itself, that's one thing. But just because it's operatic and theatrical, you know, I have to remind myself, you know, that I like it, A, so that's what matters. And B, like you said, that's just years of sort of snobbery talking.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm so over the desaturation trend. Show me stuff in color. Like,
yeah, and if it's, you know, if it's bad, it's bad. If it's good, it's good. And it's kind of...
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about the technical stuff before we deal with the elephant in the room?
Tom Hanks is basically the Penguin in this movie. Like, he looks, and it's like particularly the one scene where I think they're in a casino at the end, and Elvis is walking off to adulation amongst the audience, and Tom Hanks is behind him and like resting his head kind of on his shoulder, and it's like, I was like, wow, that is Danny DeVito in Batman Returns right there.
Yeah, so I would say another complaint, again, more prominent in the early section of the movie, was some very extreme close-ups, which do have the effect of like making me feel like I'm in someone's personal space. Like I do like sometimes when the camera gets too close, like I want to physically pull back. It's uncomfortable. Almost nobody's skin can hold up to that.
Yeah.
And no prosthetics can hold up to that. I was like, you were doing yourself and your makeup person no favors by coming in that close.
Yeah.
I was like, pull back and let the illusion try to blend, but...
Yeah. It was another thing, I think, that once you, like, kind of settled into it, like, the movie got going, it became better. I also kind of think they couldn't quite settle on a tone for that character. I really like the idea of him narrating the movie. I don't think it was either they were waffling between him trying to explain himself and him being the true villain of the story, which he is, by the way.
I thought, like, I want to get into the villainy of the piece, like, further down the road, but just in terms of, like, the character in Tom Hanks's performance.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was very big in a big movie, and I think that it kind of, like, was a good, like, sort of, yin and yang thing with Elvis. But I don't think they got the tone of the character. I know he's being roasted in the reviews for this performance.
Yeah, he absolutely is.
It's nowhere near that bad, I think. It's just...
I think it's that bad, but I don't think it's Tom Hanks's fault that it's that bad. Like, the writing was really terrible. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is just stupid that comes out of his mouth, and it's really hard to pull off a whole 3 hours worth of terrible voiceover and dialogue. Like, the snowman thing got really old really fast, and they kept
I kind of like that.
hammering it. Okay, well, I was getting annoyed, and I was like, I feel like Tom Hanks is getting annoyed. Like, Tom Hanks is taking a lot of blame for just really poor writing and not being able to overcome some of the shortcomings in the way the character was written.
Yeah, and there were so many, like, I think, again, this is Austin Butler doing a lot of heavy lifting where I found it, I hate things where I'll bring it back to your phrase, too dumb to live, where, like, I'm watching something and I'm like, you should see through this. And I think that both of them in their scenes together did a very good job of not making me as a viewer frustrated at these decisions, which is hard for me, even in, like, good stuff where you're just like want to, like, scream at the people on the screen.
Yeah.
So I definitely, and maybe it was, but I just thought they did a good job at that when, at least in the one-on-one scenes.
I would agree. Yeah, I agree with you there. I think the one-on-one scenes were the strength of the movie.
I just wanted to bring this up when they're doing, I really love the merchandising parts of the movie because that reminded me of good bosses that I've had, but bosses nonetheless in the sort of, like, corporate retail world. Like, that's how their mind works. And I thought they nailed that when he's unveiling all, like, for the first time, when things are still pretty rosy, like the Elvis board game and all that stuff.
The I hate Elvis.
Yeah, I love his
like,
line.
Get him on both sides.
It's like, what is hate worth if it's free? And I'm like, man, you're a genius. Like, that is so brilliant.
Yeah, and I guess for me, to your point about, like, too dumb to live, or, like, why did he fall for all this? Like, one of the things I thought, so again, to me, the Austin Butler performance was what made this movie, the Colonel Tom Parker, all of it, Tom Hanks, the way the character was written, and just the framing device. None of it worked for me. And I thought, the movie had such an opportunity there as to use that framing device, because that still happens in the music industry, right? Like, tale is old as time.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about, the Disney kids, was it NSYNC, who got locked into those horrible, painful contracts. Was, whatchamacallit, Jared Leto's band suing to get out of their contract because they somehow, like, sold an album that still owed the record company $500,000.
Yeah.
Like, so to me, I'm like, that is exactly what happens. And it's never stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, everyone I've talked to, and it's, I don't have the widest social circle, did not know about this. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's kind of foolish to ever think that this isn't what's going on because the world is just so predatory. But it did interest me that, like, a number of people didn't know about this. And I think it's, whether you think it worked or not, I'm glad that it was such a big part of the movie.
Agreed.
And that they still pumped Elvis to the front. In the trailers, Austin Butler is credited first, mm-hmm. which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And just kind of, like, making it an Elvis movie that is very much about that other character. I think even at the risk of failure, I'm glad they did it. I'm glad it was such a big part of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think they didn't carry
crazy
it.
As it was.
Yeah, I think they didn't carry it off, but I agree. And I just thought, people don't know that about Elvis. I'm like, how many people were surprised to find out Prince changing his name to the weird symbol thing was just an F you to Warner?
Oh, yeah.
And, and I think as much as, let me take that back. So I'm not a particular fan of her work, and I don't know a lot about Taylor Swift, but mm-hmm. like, I mean, her re-recording her masters was, like, such an incredibly, like, bold move for the music industry.
Yeah. Because it's crazy. It makes you think about all these people that are, like, the hangers-on have been done to death. And so I'm glad that was addressed in the movie, but not a big part of it. But it makes you think that the person with the talent is doing just so much and these other people can sort of like insert themselves in and make a money machine out of it is crazy, but we accept it, I guess. You know, it's like, it's just so normal that it's just insane. Like,
yeah, I mean, we accept it, but also, like I said, like, we don't really know about it. Like, I feel like we didn't know what was going on with NSYNC and all that Disney stuff until much later. And
because it's presented as such such a huge opportunity, and it is, but it's like they position themselves as like gatekeepers almost, right? Like,
I mean, it's like the devil and poor old Faust, man. Like, you sign that contract and you sign away your life, and who has the lawyer or the ability to, like,
or is like going to walk away from that opportunity even, you know, as like, because I'm assuming, you know, you probably don't like know what you're getting into, but, you know, it's still like the chance you take to have a chance and to be really big, I guess, you know, of course you're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, like you said, I think there's a balance, like Colonel Tom Parker and the merchandising and all the stuff that he did for Elvis definitely was worth something.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
You know what I mean? Like, there's value add to management a lot of times. I would argue there's very little value add to a record label these days.
Yeah, minimal. Yeah, it's just like, you know, just... I guess that brings up, like, another thing that I thought was kind of, like, I thought was, like, corny, but, like, appealed to the... sort of like the lizard brain part of me, where it's like, I like movie things set in the movies, where he's like, we're just chasing eternity. And I'm like, you're not. Like, you're looking for a lot of money off someone else's talent.
Right.
And that's cool. Like, I prefer that character trait to, like, because I guarantee you that actual person never had that thought at all.
Oh, yeah.
There's no chance. None whatsoever. And you could make the argument that he's like, that's one of his snow jobs, is saying this.
Right.
To keep him in there. But I do think that the movie would make, and this goes back to the parts of the narration that I didn't like as much, where they like position themselves as that is what he thinks. And that he's trying to like explain why he did what he did in this way that isn't necessary, that would make it more interesting if he was just bad.
Right.
You know, and I think, or in a worse but at least more consistent movie, he was just that, you know, but they couldn't quite settle on it, which was like an interesting failure to me.
Right. And again, yeah, they couldn't settle on it. They couldn't commit to it. And I'm with you. Like, I think because this is so prevalent, because it happens so often, and yet it happens kind of under the radar, and mainstream audience don't necessarily hear about it until apparently Taylor Swift tells you what's going on. And again, all the credit in the world to her for taking that move. Like, I think that was really ballsy, and I'm really impressed that she was like, you know what? Fine, I will go back. So what she did was she went back and re-recorded her original recordings exactly the same as they were before, because the record label wouldn't give up the rights to them.
Yeah.
And she was like, fine, I'll remake them and reissue everything I've ever done. And because I'm actually Taylor Swift. Yeah. Like, I'm actually the talent here.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, I think that character hasn't been represented on screen very often. And I think that would have been...
Yeah, it's like, if you go back to like things like Ray or Walk the Line, I guess, are the two that really come to mind. There's like another really good one with Adrian Brody, Cadillac Records, that I think got into this like a little bit more. But the studio owners, like Sam Phillips in particular, are always presented as these people like just like handing out opportunities.
Right.
And there aren't these, like, the villain is always like the road getting them into drugs, which was like another really interesting thing I thought about this movie as well, is it kind of like didn't do that. Like, it wasn't, I mean, they didn't push that's like it was obvious that he was like taking uppers and downers the whole time.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, oh, you know, he's like out on his own, he's like wet behind the ears and like takes one pill and that's a wrap.
Yeah.
Like, they did a very good job of like not beating you over the head with it. But yeah, these other movies, they don't have like a villainous sort of like this, particularly like the early 2000s ones. There's not a villainous manager. It's always their own demons sort of stoke their ego to the point where they derail themselves, and then the narrative is then the recovery, like the humbling, you know what I mean? Which this just didn't have, which I really liked. But
with the obvious exception of What's Love Got to Do with It and Ike Turner trying to destroy Tina. Yeah. Well, which is an example of and now that you said that, it was like makes that movie stand up more to my mind. Yeah. And so to me, I think that was a missed opportunity. I wish that had been better, because I think that was what the movie really was trying to sell you on. And I thought that was an important idea. I do want to sort of bring up a couple things. One, for those of you who can't see us, Adam is white, I am white. That is why we're not delving into the cultural appropriation and Black music issue in this movie. I don't think it was handled terribly well, but that is not for us to... You can read plenty of Black creators who will have great insights onto that. We are not your hosts for that topic.
I think that they did show you where he was getting his ideas from and where the music he was passionate about came from.
They did.
And I don't think they presented it like it was his idea. And they did a really good job of like the conflict with the music, whether true to life or not, was that it made younger white people not care as much about these invented barriers.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think not all of the characters themselves were handled well, and there were a lot of issues around it, which again, please go seek out some Black creators to delve into that. We're not your audience for it. But they did basically beat you over the head with the fact that, like, the reason Elvis became popular was because he was white and he was singing Black music. Yeah. And there was a taste for Black music, and unfortunately there was not a taste for Black artists. Yeah. And I respect that they hit you over the head with that. I also respected the fact there was like a bit of a throwaway about the Rolling Stones in there.
Similar to almost Elvis being like being fans and trying to like in a time that like, and I mean, I would say even now is that time when you try to like sort of like you're like, well, I'm all right with everybody, and this is just like the stuff that I like, and so that's why I'm doing it. Right. Like, and not it being about, like... A
cynical crash.
Or, like, stealing, per se. Like, because it is taken, but I don't think he was, like, personally, like, insidiously, like, ripping people off, maybe? I don't know. That's a different... Not my place to say, but...
Right, exactly.
But he had a genuine respect for the artists that he was influenced by.
Yes. Yeah, and I did think...
In the world of the movie.
Yeah. And I did think... I assume this was intentional. I thought they should have hammered this point home more than they did. This was one of the things they just weren't obvious about, but there's like a scene where right before he comes out to do his big, like, dangerous number, and they have all these, like, little Rockette girls on stage in, like, skimpy garb. And... I thought what they were trying to say was make the point that, like, the reason that Elvis was so dangerous was not just because the Black music thing, but also because, like, you know, teenage girls were freaking out. It's like, we can't have female desire. Like, male desire, totally fine. We can have all kind of women parade around in skimpy costumes. But God forbid a man shakes his hips and it's like, shut that down right away.
I think they did a lot of that at the beginning, for sure. I love... What does he say? He's like, Elvis the pelvis. If that isn't the, like, it's like, if
which
that
was
isn't
true.
The most, like a juvenile thing I've ever heard. Or so, it's not even that, but it's just so funny. Like, it's like,
can you imagine?
And again, it's like all this stuff that, you know, seems, I mean, he's actually kind of one of those things where it, like, kind of doesn't seem tame now. You know, when you were like, oh, like, women's ankles showing is what they used to get worked up about. And now, like, Elvis, I still think is, like sensual and, like, edgy.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. It was an absolute delight to see those performances recreated and his style recreated. So final thoughts? Anything we didn't get to? I just gave you my two.
I think, to piggyback on that extremely important part of the movie to discuss, I was upset there was no Elvis and Nixon part.
Okay.
And this is stupider, But one of the lines that really... so basically, I found out about this whole story because my father and I used to listen to books on tape driving into school. And one of the ones my dad picked out was called Elvis and the Colonel.
Okay.
Forget who it's by, but it was basically my introduction to this story and, you know, how bled dry basically Elvis was by this guy. But it did... There was a really good throwaway line about when, you know, at the end of his life, obviously we all know... you know, fat Elvis, and it talks about how his eating habits were never good and how he used to keep a bowl of bacon on the piano while he practiced, and then it would be covered in like pepper because he liked pepper. And I was like, just give me one scene with like a bowl of bacon on a piano.
Definitely missed opportunity right there.
Like a little Easter egg, if you will. But I thought it was really great. I thought that one more, I guess, stylistic thing is how they kind of like sort of, when like the arrival to Vegas, I thought was done so well, where he thinks he's going to get out and go on this international tour. And the Colonel's like, well, let me show you this thing in the desert. And they really set that up as a locale that was really cool in the movie. I thought it was almost like sort of like funhouse horror vibes for me almost. And, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, and it turns out that scene where he like publicly starts going off on Colonel Parker did not happen in real life.
No, I'm not surprised to learn that.
But what did happen was that one of the staff got fired because she was kind of doing him favors. That's all they said, you know, like bringing him food or whatever. And she got really sick and he went to her house to like see if she was okay. And then they fired her over him coming to see her. And he apparently went on a rant to Hilton, who owned the hotel, and was like, you're an evil, greedy, like, how could you fire this beloved employee? So, like, sticking up for an employee. And then Colonel Parker was like, well, hang on there. And he was like, you're fired too. Like, so apparently there was, like, a public firing and retraction.
Gotcha.
But it was not related to, like, what was on screen.
I guess one other thing, I really thought that Priscilla, as usual, not in the movie enough, but I did think that their early scene... They had a lot of, like, odd chemistry for something that's between a 25-year-old and a 15-year-old. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they kind of glossed that over in the movie, didn't they?
His teenage, like, she could be 19. Yeah. Like, all right, bro, like, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, really puts that Great Balls of Fire in perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's worse for, like, a number of reasons, but it's not great, and I think it's definitely... I don't know. I think they think they tried. But I don't think they did.
I don't think they tried. I mean, like, again, there was a lot of really negative stuff that they could have brought up that they just didn't. And I was fine with that. I was like, I don't need like a gritty, realistic picture of a drug addict on the road. Like, that also has been done a million times.
Yeah.
And I'm like...
It didn't lie enough to, like, make you also annoyed at that. You know what I mean? Like, there was enough sort of grit. And
I mean, to me, the movie's ultimate appeal was that it was about the myth of Elvis.
Yeah.
Not about Elvis the man. Like, they don't really delve into Elvis the man. Yeah. And I'm like, okay. I'm fine with that. I wanted them to tell me about the myth. Like I said, I mean, I grew up with, like, the tabloid stories of Elvis isn't really dead and, like, people making these pilgrimages to Graceland.
Just like...
And thinking, like, I mean, the songs are fine.
Yeah.
I don't understand why people were so enamored with Elvis, and I think the movie did what I needed it to do, which was tell me why everybody was so freaking enamored with Elvis.
Yeah, it worked. And one other curious thing about that was how at the end, he's the oldies act in Vegas. They're like, oh, for the old folks, the older crowd, whatever they say. And I'm like, it's 1973. Elvis is 39.
I know.
So he is not old. And not only that, but his fans are probably younger than he is. So it's like crazy how that sort of transition happened.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a stab in to the heart. I was like, God, he's younger than I am now.
Yeah, it's like he's 42 when he died. It's crazy. But, you know, they do a really good job, too, of like how like they generated content back in the day for there was no internet. And so what do? You put out a bunch of movies and a bunch of merchandise and saturate a song over and over to keep people like, and I think the Colonel did it, like, it was like the merchandising aspect where he's like, how can I like keep awareness up?
Right.
Was really cool. I watched an Elvis movie and listened to Elvis all day the day I went to see this. It was really fun and very strange.
The songs are undeniably great.
Oh,
like
good. Yeah, he's good.
Like, we still know those songs, and his voice is...
It's good.
It's stunning. Like, again, I checked to see, like, because a lot of times they've had the actors sing, and I'm like, I don't want to hear anybody other than this person.
Yeah.
Like, most of these people, with the possible exception of Elton John, became famous because of their voices. Like, I don't want to hear somebody imitating them. I want to hear them, like, put their own music in. So a lot of it was Elvis himself, which really needed to happen.
And it was so convincing. I guess I don't like to do a ton of research into like the production itself until like after I've seen a movie, because it's more fun. But I could not tell that. The only thing I could tell was that obviously at the end when it's Austin Butler and then it transitions into Elvis in that last video clip, which was great.
Yeah.
It was really good, and I'm happy to know that you liked it.
Yeah.
Didn't hate it.
So, to that end, we know this has done pretty well box office-wise. It's popular internationally. Social impact score from 1, worst movie, nobody saw it, to 10, life and movies as we know it changed forever.
I'm going to go higher than a 5 just because it gets people aware of this story and kind of brings the... this sort of like legend of Elvis down a little bit. So I feel like 6 or 7, there were like we talked about, there were like clunkier aspects, but I think that the whole thing was done with good intentions, and that goes a long way for me. So
I am going to exactly where you are. 6 or 7, I think, at this late stage of the pandemic, like, butts and seats is a real accomplishment.
Yep.
Like, so getting people interested in seeing movies again, all the credit in the world to the movie for that. And I can only hope this is the launch of a great career for Austin Butler, because he was amazing, and I'm excited to see him do something.
Project Dune 2.
Is he in Dune? Oh, good God. Where I will be at home so I can take all the pee breaks I want to take. All right. Recommendations.
Sure. I'm just finishing up a book that's really good. It's called Lapvona by Otessa Moshfegh.
Great. I'm going to recommend, I will say that I drove, like, embarrassingly, annoyingly close to 2,000 miles in a rental car in New Mexico, almost all of which was spent listening to the American Scandal podcast. And if you are going to go back and listen to one thing to tie it to this episode, they have a great section on payola in the music industry and how DJs were paid to play certain songs and how the label then owned the songs and made the money and paid the DJs and all of that from the 50s all the way through to, like, I think the 90s. That scheme is broken down. It's really interesting and it's worth a listen. All right, well, if you agree with all of our opinions, which I'm sure you do, hit us up on Facebook. We are on our website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. This episode will be on YouTube. Leave a comment there. Find us wherever you find podcasts. Recommend us. Tell your friends. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.